A library burned shut by a volcano in 79 AD just started reading itself. A 12,000-year-old stone temple that, according to every history book ever written, shouldn't exist because humans at the time weren't supposed to be capable of building it. Roman concrete that gets stronger every century, while ours crumbles in 50 years. For thousands of years, we stared at ancient mysteries and assumed they'd never be solved. Then, modern science showed up with cosmic ray scanners, artificial intelligence, and particle accelerators. And one by one, the ancient world started giving up its secrets. These are 9 mysteries from antiquity, finally cracked open by technology their creators couldn't have imagined. Starting at number 9, the Great Pyramid's secret room, discovered without moving a single stone. For 4,500 years, everyone assumed we knew everything about the Great Pyramid. We'd mapped it, crawled through it, argued about it endlessly. Then scientists fired beams of cosmic ray particles, the kind that pass through solid rock, straight through the entire structure. What they found changed things immediately. A massive hidden void, 100 feet long, sitting directly above the Grand Gallery. Nobody put it there by accident. We still don't know what's inside. After 4.5 millennia of study, the most examined building in human history had a secret chamber we'd never noticed. But if a hidden room inside a landmark seems impossible to miss, wait until you see what defeated 6 centuries of professional code breakers. Number 8. The Voynich manuscript, cracked after 600 years of humiliating failure. For centuries, every serious cryptographer who touched this thing walked away defeated. The CIA tried. Naval intelligence tried. The world's best codebreakers during World War II spent weeks on it and quietly gave up. The National Security Agency published their own failed decryption attempt decades later and admitted they had nothing. The manuscript is 240 pages of flowing, alien-looking script packed with drawings of naked women, bathing in green pools, bizarre plants that match no known species, and astronomical diagrams that almost make sense but never quite do. People assumed it was either a sophisticated hoax or an encrypted message from a medieval secret society. A few researchers genuinely believed it wasn't from Earth. Then, computational linguists fed the entire text into pattern detection software designed for unknown languages. The statistical structure inside the Voynich manuscript matched the signature of a real human language, not gibberish, not code. Researchers now believe it's written in a Proto-Romance dialect, an early ancestor of Spanish, French, and Italian, using a personal shorthand the author invented. The scribe built a private alphabet from scratch because nothing existing could capture the sounds. One of the first decoded passages appears to be a women's health remedy. So the world's most notoriously unreadable document wasn't a conspiracy or a cipher. It was a medieval doctor's personal notebook, written in a language that technically didn't exist yet. And that wasn't the only time ancient ingenuity outpaced modern understanding. Number 7. The secret ingredient in Roman concrete hiding in plain sight for 2,000 years. For decades, engineers could not explain why Roman seawalls built along the Mediterranean are still standing perfectly intact while modern concrete cracks and crumbles within 50 years. Roman harbors look better now than the day they were poured. The assumption was that Romans got lucky with their quarrying choices. Then researchers pulled cores from an ancient Roman harbor and fired them through a particle accelerator. What they found inside was something no modern concrete contains. The Romans mixed volcanic ash from a specific region near Naples with seawater, and that combination triggered a chemical reaction nobody had anticipated. Over decades, seawater seeping into the structure caused new mineral crystals to grow inside the concrete, filling microscopic cracks before they could spread. The material was actively healing itself. The Romans had no idea why it worked. They just knew it did. The specific volcanic ash they used came from a single geological deposit near the Bay of Naples. Scientists have tried replicating the effect using ash from other volcanoes. It doesn't work. Roman concrete was effectively engineered for exactly one location on Earth, and they stumbled into it without ever understanding the chemistry. Our most advanced concrete still degrades in salt water. Theirs improves with age. But getting the chemistry right was one thing, getting the history right was another, and this next one rewrote a story historians had taught for decades. Number 6. The real reason Easter Island collapsed, and it had nothing to do with the statues. For years, the standard story was airtight. The Rapa Nui people cut down every tree on the island to transport their famous moai statues, destroyed their own environment, and collapsed in a wave of war and famine. Historians called it the defining cautionary tale of civilizational self-destruction. Then researchers drilled into the island's soil and extracted sediment cores going back 3,000 years. Each layer was a precise chemical record of exactly what was happening on the island at that moment. Those layers told a completely different story. The forest didn't vanish in a reckless frenzy. It declined slowly over centuries, and the Rapa Nui adapted with striking sophistication. They developed a farming technique called lithic mulching, breaking volcanic rock into fine gravel and mixing it into the topsoil. It regulated ground temperature, retained moisture, and boosted crop yields without requiring a single tree. The sediment showed no evidence of mass starvation or widespread violence. The population was resourceful and stable. What actually ended the Rapa Nui was European contact in the 1700s. Slave raiders abducted an estimated 1,500 people within a single decade, including nearly every literate elder who could read the island's Rongorongo script. Smallpox handled the rest. A civilization that survived over 1,000 years on one of the most isolated islands on Earth was dismantled in under 50 years by outside contact. The statues outlasted everyone. And, as it turns out, the Rapa Nui weren't the only ancient people running sophisticated chemistry operations we're only now catching up to. Number 5. The exact recipe for Egyptian mummification, decoded from a ceramic jar that had been sitting in a museum storage room for decades, with its original label still attached. For generations, historians assumed Egyptian embalmers passed their craft down through apprenticeship alone. No written instructions, no surviving formula. Then researchers scraped residue from inside a jar recovered from an embalming workshop near Saqqara. The jar had a handwritten tag identifying its contents by name. Inside were traces of 31 distinct substances. Scientists ran each residue through mass spectrometry, the same technology used in forensic crime labs, and matched every compound to a specific ingredient. This wasn't guesswork. The embalmers combined plant oils from Southeast Asia, pine resins from the Eastern Mediterranean, animal fats, and beeswax, each calibrated to work in combination. Some of these materials had to be imported across thousands of miles. The supply chains required to produce a single mummy were the ancient equivalent of a global pharmaceutical operation. The mixture was engineered to kill bacteria, repel insects, seal the skin, and slow oxidation all simultaneously. One compound in the recipe, isomerized pistacia resin, wasn't formally synthesized by modern chemists until the 20th century. The Egyptians were using it routinely around 1450 BC, roughly 3,400 years before we caught up. The jar that cracked the code had been cataloged and stored since 1837. Nobody scraped the inside until last decade. But some ancient texts didn't just need decoding. They needed to be read in the first place. Number 4. The Phaistos disc, finally read after 3,700 years of silence. When archaeologists pulled it from the ruins of a Minoan palace in Crete in 1908, they knew immediately it was extraordinary. A clay disc about 6 inches across, covered on both sides with 241 symbols stamped in a spiral pattern. Each symbol was pressed into the clay using a separate carved seal, essentially the world's first movable type printing system, before it was fired. Nobody could read it. The symbols matched nothing in any known ancient writing system. For over a century, researchers tried everything from frequency analysis to comparing it with linear A. Nothing worked. Then a computational linguist cross-referenced the symbol frequency patterns with known ancient Mediterranean religious texts. The distribution matched the structure of a devotional hymn. Researchers now believe the disc is a sacred prayer to Astarte, the Minoan mother goddess, meant to be read aloud in a specific ritual context. The spiral reading direction wasn't arbitrary. It mimicked the motion of a ceremony. The disc was pressed and fired around 1700 BC, making it one of the oldest printed documents ever found. Whoever made it carved over 45 individual stamp tools just to produce this single disc. That's not casual inscription. That's a production system built for one sacred purpose. Sacred purposes, it turns out, were driving a lot of ancient engineering we completely misunderstood, including the most famous mystery in South America. Number 3. The true purpose of the Nazca lines, mapped from the sky after 2,000 years of guesswork. The lines are enormous. Some stretch for miles across the Peruvian desert floor. There are animals, plants, geometric shapes, a hummingbird nearly 300 feet long, a spider, a monkey with a spiral tail. For most of the 20th century, the leading theory was that they were landing strips for alien spacecraft. Slightly less dramatically, historians suggested they were astronomical calendars. Neither theory held up. Then researchers used low-flying drone surveys and ground-penetrating radar to map every line in detail against the surrounding landscape. Almost every major figure and line points directly toward an ancient water source. Underground aquifers, seasonal streams, mountain runoff channels. The lines weren't roads or calendars or alien runways. They were a map of water. The Nazca people drew these figures as ritual paths to walk during drought ceremonies, offerings to the gods in exchange for rain. Each animal figure corresponds to a different water source in the region. The hummingbird lines up with a specific mountain stream that runs for only 3 weeks per year. Researchers can now explain what each figure points at and what kind of water it represents. What they still can't answer is which deity each figure was meant to reach. And if drone surveys could rewrite the Nazca story from the air, this next discovery rewrote an entire library from the inside out. Number 2. Reading the Herculaneum scrolls, burned shut by Vesuvius for 2,000 years and finally cracked open by artificial intelligence. When Mount Vesuvius erupted in 79 AD, it didn't just bury Pompeii. It also incinerated an entire private library in the nearby city of Herculaneum, turning nearly 1,800 papyrus scrolls into fragile cylinders of charcoal. Any attempt to unroll them physically caused them to disintegrate. For centuries, they sat in a museum in Naples, completely intact, completely unreadable, mocking every scholar who came near them. Then researchers at 3 separate universities developed a technique using high-resolution CT scans to photograph every internal layer of each scroll without touching the exterior. The images were fed to machine learning models trained to detect the faint difference between ink and blank papyrus at the microscopic level. Scientists turned it into an open competition, the Vesuvius Challenge, and offered cash prizes to anyone who could decode the most text. Within months, they had recovered complete passages from scrolls that hadn't been read since before the fall of Rome. One of the first decoded words was the Greek word for purple. The recovered texts turned out to be philosophical writings on pleasure and happiness, likely from the library of a wealthy Roman patron. Over 1,000 scrolls remain sealed. Researchers estimate the technique could eventually recover the equivalent of an entirely new ancient library. But as remarkable as reading a burned library is, it still assumes we know roughly when literate civilization began. This last one destroyed that assumption entirely. Number 1. Göbekli Tepe, the temple that rewrote the beginning of human civilization. It sits in southern Turkey, on a hilltop overlooking the Fertile Crescent. For most of history, it was just a hill. Locals farmed it, archaeologists walked past it. Then, in 1994, a Kurdish shepherd noticed something sticking out of the ground and called it in. What researchers found underneath changed the timeline of human history permanently. Göbekli Tepe is a massive complex of carved stone pillars arranged in perfect circles, covered in detailed relief carvings of animals. Foxes, snakes, vultures, scorpions, all rendered with startling precision. The pillars stand up to 18 feet tall and weigh up to 10 tons each. Radiocarbon dating placed its construction at roughly 12,000 years ago. That's 7,000 years before Stonehenge, 6,000 years before the Egyptian pyramids. Göbekli Tepe is the oldest known monumental construction in human history. The part that broke historians wasn't the age, it was who built it. At 12,000 years ago, humans were supposed to be simple, nomadic hunter-gatherers, moving from camp to camp, barely surviving. They weren't supposed to be capable of quarrying multi-ton stone blocks, transporting them up a hill, carving them with sophisticated iconography, and assembling them into a precisely engineered ceremonial complex. The site required the organized labor of hundreds of people over many generations. Agriculture may have come after Göbekli Tepe, not before it. Some researchers now believe the need to feed the workforce that built this site is what drove the invention of farming. Religion didn't follow civilization. It may have started it. The people who built it vanished without a name. Less than 5% of the site has been uncovered. Every few years, someone points a new machine at something nobody ever thought to look inside, and another chapter of history rewrites itself. The Voynich manuscript was sitting on a shelf. The mummification jar was labeled in 1837. The Herculaneum scrolls had been waiting 2,000 years. The next answer is probably already in a museum basement somewhere, waiting for the right technology. Subscribe if you want to be there when it finally speaks.